I thought the worst thing about working night shifts was coming home exhausted at 6 in the morning, barely able to keep my eyes open as I fumbled with my house keys. I was completely wrong. The worst thing was pulling into my driveway after a 12-hour shift at the hospital, expecting to find my house quiet and peaceful, only to see my 8-year-old daughter Belle sitting on our front porch steps in her pink unicorn pajamas at dawn, her knees pulled up to her chest, trembling like a leaf in the wind. My heart immediately dropped into my stomach. Belle never woke up before 8 on weekends, and she definitely never went outside by herself, especially not in her pajamas. Something was terribly wrong. I practically threw my car into park and ran toward her, my nursing bag still hanging off my shoulder, my mind racing through every possible scenario of what could have happened while I was gone. When I knelt down in front of her, I could see that her face was pale and streaked with dried tears. Her usually bright brown eyes looked haunted in a way that no child's eyes should ever look. I reached out to touch her cheek, and she felt cold despite the warm morning air. "Belle, honey, what are you doing out here? Why aren't you inside sleeping?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though panic was rising in my chest like a tidal wave. She looked up at me with those big, scared eyes and said the words that would change everything. "Mommy, I heard footsteps in your bedroom all night long, but you weren't home. Heavy footsteps like a grown-up man walking around. I was too scared to go check, so I hid under my blankets until the sun came up. Then I ran outside to wait for you." My name is Savannah Rivers, and I'm a 32-year-old single mother who works as a night shift nurse at County General Hospital. For the past 2 years, since my divorce from Brielle's father Camden, it's been just the two of us against the world. I chose the night shift because it pays 20% more than day shifts, and every extra dollar matters when you're raising a child on your own. Belle is my everything, my brave, smart, incredibly intuitive little girl who has this amazing ability to sense when something isn't right. That morning, as I stood there looking at my terrified daughter sitting on our porch in her pajamas, I realized that our safe, predictable little world was about to be turned completely upside down. Because if Belle heard footsteps in my bedroom while I was at work, that meant someone had been in our house. Someone had been in our home while my baby was sleeping, defenseless and alone. The thought made my blood run cold, and I knew in that moment that everything I thought I knew about safety, about our quiet neighborhood, about the security of our little rental house was about to be shattered forever. Let me tell you how we ended up in this situation, because none of this would have happened if my life hadn't fallen apart 2 years earlier. When Camden and I divorced, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of paperwork, legal fees, and the overwhelming responsibility of suddenly being a single mother. Camden wasn't a bad father, but he wasn't particularly present either. He traveled constantly for his sales job, and when he was home, he was more interested in his golf games and poker nights than spending time with Belle and me. The divorce was messy, but not bitter. We both knew our marriage had run its course, and we wanted what was best for Belle. Camden moved to Arizona for a better job opportunity, and we agreed that Belle would spend summers with him and alternate holidays. It wasn't ideal, but it worked for our situation. The problem was that Camden's child support barely covered half of our expenses, and I needed to figure out how to make ends meet on my own. That's when I discovered that County General Hospital was desperate for night shift nurses. The pay was significantly better than day shifts, nearly 20% more, which meant I could actually afford to keep our little rental house in Maplewood Heights. It's a quiet suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets, well-maintained sidewalks, and the kind of community feel where neighbors actually know each other's names. Mr. Garrison, our elderly neighbor, had lived next door for 30 years and always kept an eye on things. Mrs. Chen across the street brought us homemade cookies every few weeks. It felt safe and stable, exactly what Belle and I needed. The night shift schedule worked perfectly with our routine. I would work from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, Tuesday through Saturday. During those nights, Belle stayed with my mother, Cordelia, who lived just 10 minutes away in a cozy apartment above her antique shop. My mom absolutely adored having Belle for sleepovers, and Belle loved staying with Grandma Cordelia, who spoiled her with late-night movie marathons and homemade pancakes for breakfast. Cordelia had been my rock through the divorce and the adjustment to single motherhood. She was the kind of grandmother who remembered every school project, every friend's name, and every little detail about Brielle's life. When I felt overwhelmed by the weight of raising a child alone while working exhausting 12-hour shifts, my mom would remind me that I was stronger than I realized and that Brielle was lucky to have such a dedicated mother. Our routine had been working beautifully for over a year. I would drop Brielle off at my mom's house around 10:30, work my shift, then pick her up the next morning. We'd spend the day together until I had to sleep in the late afternoon, and then we'd repeat the cycle. Brielle had adjusted well to the schedule, and I felt like I was finally getting my life back on track financially and emotionally. But 3 days before this nightmare began, everything changed. My mom called me at work around 2 in the morning, her voice hoarse and congested. She had come down with the flu, the kind that hits you like a freight train and leaves you bedridden for days. There was no way she could watch Brielle while being that sick, and I couldn't risk exposing my daughter to such a severe illness. I had never left Brielle alone overnight before. She was only 8 years old, and the thought of her being in the house by herself while I was at work made my stomach churn with anxiety. But I didn't have any other options. Camden was in Phoenix on a business trip, and my few close friends either had their own small children or lived too far away to help on such short notice. Brielle, being the mature and brave little girl she is, insisted she would be fine. "Mommy, I'm not a baby anymore. I know how to lock the doors. I have your phone number memorized, and Mr. Garrison is right next door if I need anything," she had said with such confidence that I almost believed it myself. I spent that entire shift calling home every 2 hours to check on her. Each time she answered on the second ring, sounding sleepy but reassuring me that everything was fine. She had done her homework, eaten the dinner I left for her, brushed her teeth, and gone to bed at her regular time. I felt proud of how responsible and independent she was becoming, even though part of me worried constantly about leaving her alone. The night shift at County General had been particularly brutal that week. We had 3 trauma cases come in within an hour of each other, including a car accident victim who required immediate surgery and an elderly man who suffered a massive heart attack. I was running on pure adrenaline and caffeine, my feet aching from being on them for 12 straight hours, my mind exhausted from making life and death decisions all night long. As I drove home that morning, I was already planning to crawl into bed and sleep until noon, then spend the afternoon with Brielle making up for the time we'd missed. I had no idea that our world was about to be turned completely upside down. The moment I saw Brielle sitting on those porch steps in her pajamas, every maternal instinct I possessed went into overdrive. I dropped my nursing bag right there on the walkway and rushed to her, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. When I knelt down and wrapped my arms around her small, shaking body, she felt so fragile and cold that I wanted to scoop her up and never let her go. "Tell me exactly what happened, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my mind was racing through every horrible possibility. "Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out." Brielle took a shaky breath and looked up at me with those big brown eyes that were still wide with fear. "It started around 2 in the morning, Mommy. I know because I looked at the clock on my nightstand. I heard these creaking sounds coming from your bedroom, like someone was walking around on the wooden floor. At first, I thought maybe you came home early from work." My stomach dropped. I had been at the hospital until 7 that morning, dealing with emergency after emergency. There was absolutely no way I could have been home at 2. I called out, "Mommy, is that you?" But nobody answered, Brielle continued, her voice getting smaller with each word. "Then I heard the footsteps again, and they were definitely too heavy to be yours. They sounded like a man's footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking around your room looking at things." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. Our house was small, just 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, with thin walls that carried sound easily. If someone had been walking around in my bedroom, Brielle would have heard every single step from her room right across the hallway. "What did you do then, baby?" I asked, though I was terrified to hear the answer. I pulled my blankets over my head and tried to convince myself I was just imagining things, but the footsteps kept happening every hour or so throughout the night. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like drawers opening and closing, or like someone was moving things around. Once, I thought I heard the closet door creak open. My hands were shaking now as I held her. The thought of some stranger rifling through my personal belongings while my daughter lay terrified in the next room made me feel sick with rage and helplessness. Around 5 in the morning, I finally got brave enough to peek down the hallway toward your room, Brielle whispered. I saw a shadow move across your doorway, Mommy. It was definitely a person, and it was definitely not you. That's when I grabbed my phone and ran outside. I've been sitting here waiting for you ever since. I pulled her closer, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. We lived in one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. We had good locks on our doors, and I always made sure everything was secure before I left for work. How could someone have gotten into our house? My first instinct was to call Camden, even though we were divorced. Maybe he had driven up from Arizona unexpectedly and decided to stop by the house for something he had forgotten. It was a long shot, but I needed to eliminate every possibility before I let myself believe that a complete stranger had been in our home. I dialed Camden's number with trembling fingers. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice groggy with sleep. Savannah? What's wrong? It's barely 7 in the morning. Camden, please tell me you came by the house last night. Please tell me you were here for some reason and just forgot to mention it. What are you talking about? I'm in Phoenix, remember? I've been here all week for the Morrison account. Why would I be at the house? The hope I had been clinging to crumbled completely. Someone was in our house last night while I was at work. Brielle heard footsteps in my bedroom all night long. Are you serious? Did you call the police? Not yet. I was hoping it was you, or maybe I was just overreacting. Savannah, if Brielle says someone was in the house, you need to take that seriously. That kid has incredible instincts. Remember when she told us about that weird guy at the playground who kept staring at children? 2 weeks later, we found out he was a registered sex offender. He was right. Brielle had always been unusually perceptive about people and situations. She could sense when something wasn't right long before adults picked up on warning signs. I hung up with Camden and immediately walked over to Mr. Garrison's house, Brielle's hand firmly clasped in mine. Our elderly neighbor was already up, watering his garden in his bathrobe and slippers. Good morning, Mr. Garrison. Did you happen to notice anything unusual at our house last night? Any strange cars parked nearby or anyone coming or going? Or, he scratched his gray beard thoughtfully. Can't say that I did, dear. I went to bed around 10 and slept straight through until 6. My hearing isn't what it used to be, especially with the bedroom fan running. Why do you ask? The final piece of hope disappeared. If someone had been in our house, they had been careful enough to avoid detection by our watchful neighbor. Standing there in my scrubs, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, holding my terrified daughter's hand, I realized that our safe little world had been violated in the most intimate way possible. Someone had been in our home, in my bedroom, going through my personal space while my child lay helpless just down the hall. The question that terrified me most was simple. Who was it? And were they planning to come back? Standing there on my front lawn in my wrinkled scrubs, holding Brielle's trembling hand, I felt the weight of every decision I had ever made as a single mother crashing down on me. Part of me wanted to dismiss this as an overactive imagination from an 8-year-old who had spent her first night alone. But the rational part of my brain, the part that had been trained to assess situations quickly and accurately in life or death hospital scenarios, was screaming that something was seriously wrong. Brielle wasn't the type of child to make up stories or exaggerate for attention. She was practical, observant, and unusually mature for her age. When she told me she had heard footsteps and seen a shadow, I believed her completely. The terror in her eyes wasn't manufactured or imagined. It was real, raw, and absolutely heartbreaking. Brielle, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said, kneeling down so we were eye to eye. We're going to call the police and have them check the house, okay? I believe you heard those footsteps, and I want to make sure we're both safe. Her face flooded with relief. You believe me? You don't think I'm being a scared baby? Absolutely not. You were incredibly brave to trust your instincts and keep yourself safe. That's exactly what I would want you to do in this situation. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my hand still shaking slightly from the adrenaline coursing through my system. The dispatcher who answered had a calm, professional voice that immediately made me feel like I was being taken seriously. 911, what's your emergency? Hi, I'm calling to request a welfare check at my home. My daughter was alone last night while I was at work, and she heard someone walking around inside the house. I need officers to search the premises before we go back inside. Can you give me your address and confirm that you and your daughter are currently safe? I rattled off our address on Maple Street and confirmed that we were both outside and unharmed. The dispatcher asked several more questions about when the incident occurred, whether we had seen any suspicious vehicles, and if we had any reason to believe someone might want to target our home specifically. Officers are being dispatched now and should arrive within 10 minutes. Please remain outside and away from the residence until they give you the all clear. Do you have somewhere safe to wait? We'll wait in my car, I said, leading Belle toward our driveway. As we settled into the front seats of my Honda Civic, I locked all the doors and turned on the engine so we could have air conditioning. Belle curled up in the passenger seat, finally looking like the tired 8-year-old she was after staying awake most of the night in fear. Mommy, what if whoever was in there is still inside? What if they hurt the police officers? The thought had crossed my mind, but I tried to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. Police officers are trained for situations like this, sweetheart. They know how to handle themselves, and they have backup if they need it. We're going to let them do their job while we stay safe out here. While we waited, my mind raced through possibilities that made my stomach churn. Could it have been a burglar who had somehow gotten trapped inside when morning came? Was it someone who knew our routine and had been watching our house? The thought that someone might have been observing us, learning when I left for work and when Belle was alone, made me feel violated in a way I had never experienced before. 8 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up to our house with their lights flashing but no sirens. 4 officers emerged, and I felt a wave of relief at seeing them take the situation seriously. The lead officer, a tall Hispanic man with graying temples, approached our car while his partner began surveying the perimeter of the house. I rolled down my window as he reached us. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Delacroix. We're going to conduct a thorough search of your home. Can you tell me if there are any weapons inside, any pets, or any areas where someone might be able to hide?" "No weapons, no pets. There's a walk-in closet in my bedroom, a hall closet, and a basement with storage areas. The basement has a window that sometimes sticks, but I always check to make sure it's locked before I leave for work." Officer Delacroix nodded and made notes in his small notebook. "We're going to approach this systematically. My partner, Officer Ramsey, and I will clear each room methodically. The 2 officers from the 2nd unit will cover the outside perimeter and check all possible entry points." "How long do you think this will take?" I asked, glancing at Belle, who was listening intently to every word. "Thorough search of a house this size should take about 20 to 30 minutes if we don't find anything. If we do discover evidence of an intruder, we'll need to treat it as a crime scene and call for additional backup." As Officer Delacroix walked toward the house, I reached over and squeezed Brielle's hand. "You did the right thing by telling me about this, baby. Whatever happens next, I'm proud of you for being so brave and smart." She squeezed back and said something that would stay with me forever. "Mommy, I have a really bad feeling that whoever was in there knows us. The footsteps didn't sound like someone who was lost or confused. They sounded like someone who knew exactly where they were going." The chill that ran down my spine had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Sitting in that car, watching 4 police officers approach my house with their hands resting on their service weapons, felt like living inside a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The next 30 minutes stretched out like hours as I watched them methodically check every window, every door, every possible entry point around the perimeter of our home. Officer Delacroix and Officer Ramsey entered through the front door with their flashlights drawn, even though it was broad daylight. I could see their silhouettes moving from room to room through the windows, checking behind furniture, opening closets, looking under beds. They were being incredibly thorough, which both reassured me and terrified me at the same time. "Mommy, look," Belle whispered, pointing toward the house. "They've been in the living room and kitchen for a long time. Now they're going toward the bedrooms." My heart rate spiked as I watched the officers disappear into the hallway that led to our bedrooms. Those were the rooms where Belle had heard the footsteps, where someone had supposedly been walking around for hours while my daughter lay terrified just across the hall. For about 10 minutes, I couldn't see any movement at all. The house looked completely still, and I started to wonder if maybe we had overreacted. Maybe Belle had been having nightmares, or maybe the old house had just been settling in ways that sounded like footsteps to a scared child sleeping alone for the first time. Then I saw Officer Ramsey appear in my bedroom window, and he was waving his partner over with urgent hand signals. My blood turned to ice water as I watched Officer Delacroix rush into the bedroom to join him. Both officers were now in my bedroom, and their body language had completely changed from routine to high alert. "Something's wrong," I whispered to Brielle, though I tried to keep my voice calm. They found something. Within minutes, the two officers from the second patrol car were also inside the house, and I could see all four of them gathered in my bedroom. The radio chatter from their patrol cars was too distant and garbled for me to understand, but the urgency in their voices was unmistakable. My cell phone rang, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Mrs. Rivers, this is Officer Delacroix calling from inside your house. I need you to remain exactly where you are and keep your doors locked. We have found an individual hiding in your bedroom closet, and we are making an arrest at this time." The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Someone is actually in there right now? "Yes, ma'am. We're handling the situation, but I need you to stay in your vehicle until we give you the all clear. We're going to escort this individual out of your house in the next few minutes." I hung up the phone and looked at Brielle, who had heard every word. Her face was pale, but there was also a look of vindication in her eyes. She had been right all along. "You were so brave, baby," I whispered, pulling her close. "You saved us both by trusting your instincts." 5 minutes later, the front door of our house opened, and I watched in absolute shock as two officers escorted a man in handcuffs down my front walkway. Even from 50 feet away, even though I hadn't seen him in 3 years, I recognized him immediately. It was Darius Blackwood, my ex-boyfriend from what felt like a lifetime ago. Darius was tall and lean with dark hair and pale blue eyes that had once seemed mysterious and attractive, but now looked cold and calculating. We had dated for about 6 months after my divorce from Camden, and at first he had seemed like exactly what I needed. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to genuinely care about both me and Brielle. But as the weeks went by, his attention had turned into obsession. He wanted to know where I was every minute of every day. He would show up at my work unannounced, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. He started making comments about Camden that made me uncomfortable, suggesting that Brielle would be better off if her father was completely out of the picture. The final straw came when I discovered that he had been going through my phone, reading my text messages, and checking my call history. When I confronted him about it, he flew into a rage, screaming that I was ungrateful and that he was the best thing that had ever happened to me. That night, I ended the relationship and asked him to leave my house, but Darius hadn't accepted the breakup. He continued calling, texting, and showing up at places where he knew I would be. He sent flowers to my workplace with notes that said things like, "You belong with me," and "We're meant to be together." When I finally got a restraining order against him, he had violated it twice before seeming to disappear from our lives completely. As the officers walked Darius past our car, he turned his head and looked directly at me through the windshield. Despite being in handcuffs, despite being caught red-handed hiding in my closet, he smiled at me with that same charming smile that had once made me feel special. Then he mouthed the words that would haunt my dreams for months to come. "You left me once, Savannah. Never again." The cold, possessive certainty in his eyes made me realize that our nightmare was far from over. The investigation that followed Darius's arrest revealed details that still make my skin crawl when I think about them today. Officer Delacroix called me later that afternoon to explain what they had discovered in my bedroom closet, and I honestly don't know how I managed to stay standing during that conversation. Darius had been living in my closet for weeks, possibly even months. He had created a makeshift living space behind my hanging clothes, complete with a sleeping bag, bottled water, protein bars, and a small battery-powered lantern. The most disturbing part was the collection of photographs he had taken of Brielle and me, without our knowledge. There were pictures of us sleeping, eating breakfast, watching television, and going about our daily routines, all shot from inside our own home. The officers found a detailed notebook where Darius had been tracking my work schedule, Brielle's school schedule, and even noting when my mother Cordelia picked up Brielle for sleepovers. He knew our entire routine better than we knew it ourselves. He had been watching us, studying us, and waiting for the perfect opportunity to make his move. The basement window that I always checked before leaving for work had been tampered with. Darius had somehow managed to disable the lock mechanism in a way that looked normal from the inside, but allowed him to enter and exit whenever he wanted. The police found tool marks on the window frame and traces of lubricant that he had used to keep it from making noise when he opened it. What terrified me most was learning that Darius had been entering our house primarily on the nights when I worked and Brielle stayed with my mother. He would spend hours in my bedroom, going through my personal belongings, sleeping in my bed, and apparently taking souvenirs. They found several pieces of my jewelry, clothing items, and even my favorite coffee mug hidden in his apartment across town. The night that Brielle heard him was supposed to be different because she normally wasn't home. When my mother got sick and Brielle had to stay at the house alone, Darius probably didn't know about the change in plans until he was already inside. The footsteps Brielle heard were likely him realizing she was home and trying to figure out what to do without alerting her to his presence. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Darius was charged with breaking and entering, stalking, burglary, violating a restraining order, and several other felonies. His bail was set extremely high, and the district attorney assured me that he would likely face significant prison time. During the arraignment, I sat in the courtroom and watched this man who had once convinced me he loved me, and I felt nothing but disgust and relief that he would be locked away. The psychological impact on both Brielle and me was something I hadn't anticipated. We both needed therapy to process the violation we felt, knowing that someone had been living in our home, watching our most private moments, and planning who knows what kind of future for us. Brielle had nightmares for months, and I found myself checking locks obsessively and looking over my shoulder constantly. We moved out of the Maple Street house immediately. I couldn't bear the thought of sleeping in a bedroom where Darius had been hiding and watching us. We found a beautiful apartment in a secure building with controlled access, security cameras, and a doorman who knew every resident personally. It cost more money, but my peace of mind was worth every penny. I also made the decision to switch to day shifts at the hospital. The night shift pay had been attractive, but it wasn't worth the risk of leaving Brielle alone again. My mother Cordelia helped with after-school care, and we created a new routine that felt safer and more sustainable for both of us. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that children's instincts should never be dismissed or minimized. Brielle's courage to speak up about what she had heard, even when she was scared and uncertain, literally saved our lives. If she had kept her fears to herself, or if I had brushed them off as childhood imagination, Darius might have escalated his behavior in ways I don't want to think about. I also learned that restraining orders are just pieces of paper unless the person they're meant to protect against chooses to respect them. Darius had violated his restraining order multiple times, but he had been clever enough to avoid getting caught until that morning. The legal system can only do so much to protect victims of stalking and harassment. Today, Brielle is thriving in school and has grown into an even more confident and intuitive young woman. She's proud of the role she played in keeping us safe, and I make sure to remind her regularly that her bravery and quick thinking were heroic. She still sleeps with a nightlight, and she still calls me if she hears unexpected noises, but she's not living in fear anymore. As for me, I've learned to trust my instincts the way I trusted Brielle's that morning. If something feels wrong, I investigate it. If someone makes me uncomfortable, I don't worry about being polite or giving them the benefit of the doubt. My daughter's safety and my own peace of mind are more important than social conventions or hurt feelings. The most powerful thing I can tell anyone watching this video is simple. Trust your gut, trust your children's gut, and never hesitate to call for help when something doesn't feel right. The embarrassment of being wrong about a potential threat is absolutely nothing compared to the cost of being right and doing nothing about it. Brielle taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs to be done to protect yourself and the people you love, even when your hands are shaking and your heart is pounding. If this story resonated with you or helped you in any way, please share it with others who might benefit from hearing it. Leave a comment below telling me about a time when trusting your instincts kept you safe, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories that matter. Your support helps me continue sharing experiences that might help other families stay safe and strong.